Well, joining me, I have the Athletics' leading transfer reporter, the guru himself, David Ornstein. David, it's good to see you. How are you set for this window? Have you managed to have a little bit of a breather like some of the Premier League and European players that have gone away before tournaments?
Well, firstly, I thought you were talking about yourself there at the top because you seem to have broken more stories and won more awards than any of us recently. So, congratulations to you. And it's a pleasure to be doing this with you. We've also got a bit of a new concept rolling out on the Athletic that I'm sure you'll tell our audiences about shortly. But yeah, I've had a post-season break. I always try and do that as soon as the Premier League season ends and before the transfer window opens and madness ensues. So I feel a tiny bit tanned, which is unusual for us who seem to spend more time than is healthy between four walls, slaving away on our journalism. Refreshed, ready to go. We've got the market, the Euros, the Copa America. And then before we know it, we'll be into the new season. There are stories that we need to be looking out for left, right, and centre, from the Man United manager situation, Chelsea obviously appointing Maresca, the recruitment that follows around all of that, and so much more besides. So it's a thrilling time, as always, to be involved.
Yeah, it is an exciting time. Um, as you mentioned, we do have a new approach to transfers this summer on the Athletic. Let's run you through some of the coverage that we have for you, along with David, myself chipping in as well. We're going to be bringing you our weekly transfer deal sheet, and that is now launched. It's going to be running every Tuesday throughout the summer, detailing the latest news, the potential ins and outs. So you can read that right now. We also have the Athletic 500, which is the Athletic's new innovative rating system, just backed up by analytics and experts. And we're going to be giving a score for every senior Premier League move this transfer window. We also have the radar as well, and that's going to be providing detailed tactical breakdowns of the standout young players. Plus, you'll also find audio versions of the radar on this feed as well, which you can enjoy, including the likes of Lamine Yamal, who we've seen excel at Barcelona, and Endrick, who's going to be soon joining him in La Liga, joining Real Madrid, along with the likes of Kylian Mbappe as well. Those ones went out earlier on this week. Let's crack on, though, now with the potential moves that we're going to see this summer, David, and give everyone a taste of what's in the deal sheet. The window isn't open officially until June the 14th. But as we know, there's plenty going on behind the scenes. And in the deal sheet, which you'll see every week, David's going to pick out his one to watch. And this week it was Michael Olise of Crystal Palace. So many eyes on him at the moment, isn't there?
I think this is going to be one of the fascinating narratives as the market unfolds because there are, of course, lots of top players in the game, and he is one of them. But not many of them have release clauses, and he does. It, by all accounts, is not extortionate, relatively speaking, for the quality of player that he is, which again carries appeal. But the key thing here is that in a market of such uncertainty about valuations, and especially around the leading players, to have a leading player who has a clause, and the clause is not ludicrous, brings a little bit of certainty and clarity to clubs when they're looking at their budgets and who they might want to target or not. And Olise has admirers across the game at the very top level. So we've seen the links to the Manchester Uniteds of this world, Manchester City, maybe Chelsea, who went for him last summer and could well try again this time round. It wouldn't surprise you if other top clubs like Liverpool, there have been some online rumours about them, and even Arsenal's name gets thrown into the hat. Your likes of Paris Saint-Germain, the biggest clubs in world football, and that puts Michael Olise in a really strong position because ultimately, if and when these offers arrive, and if Crystal Palace are compelled to accept by virtue of there being a clause, he'll have his pick of many of the leading lights in world football. And everything I hear about Olise is that he's a considered guy, very sort of intelligent and calm, and really works these things through in his head. He's not going to jump into a rash decision. Maybe he decides ultimately he wants to stay at Crystal Palace. I don't think there's a guarantee that he moves, but it is one that is being talked about in football among clubs and executives and people that work in the market as somebody that there is a good chance he will move. It's somebody we should keep an eye on, and you can understand why when he appears to have all the qualities that are going to take him right to the very top level, fitness providing. Now, he pledged his loyalty to Crystal Palace last summer when Chelsea were trying to sign him, and I think they're grown up. They would know that in a year's time or potentially in the near future, they could be in this position again, Crystal Palace, and I'm sure they'll deal with it in a mature way. But just finishing where I started on him likely to be having his pick of many elite clubs, this is somebody there's a feeling around that he should be aiming as high as possible. I've always been led to believe that Champions League would be the step that he would take after Crystal Palace. Now, that's not ruling out a really exciting project. And if he holds talks with, I don't know, say Manchester United, and he really likes what he hears and the numbers are right, and because they are a team that are interested in him, and it all adds up, then maybe something does happen there. But I just think you need to know with Michael Elise that if Champions League clubs are in the frame, and he is going to leave what is a really stable and exciting project at Crystal Palace right now under Oliver Glasner with so many talented players, then you would imagine he would be looking for the step that's really going to allow him to challenge for and win the biggest trophies in world football. And so my gaze, if he was to leave Crystal Palace, would be more towards Champions League clubs, but none of that is set in stone right now. And I just think it's one that we need to pay close attention to in the coming weeks and, of course, months, because you never know when these things will actually happen, if they do. And it's always a little bit dangerous putting timelines on it.
Yeah, and it's also interesting with Crystal Palace when they have someone else who is so highly regarded in Eze, who may well also have suitors, may well be tempted away, and they might have an option between the two almost. Who would they like to sell, and how difficult those two competing forces are, I suppose.
Yeah, these will all be internal discussions at Crystal Palace. I don't know if they'll have a toss-up between the two, but Eberechi Eze also has a release clause in his
Yeah.
contract, so that gives clubs certainty in exactly the same way that I described on Elise. It's important to add, from all of my conversations, I'm not aware of any concrete movement yet on either of those two. No developments, no formal talks. Of course, there'll be expressions of interest and inquiries to representatives. That's how it works in the market among all clubs. There will be inquiries to the clubs, from the suitors. But are things developing on those two? Because there have been reports that, this is gathering pace on Eze and this on Elise. To my knowledge, no, not at this stage. Will that change? Yeah, it could at any moment. But I think a bit of calm right now, and respect to Crystal Palace, who hold their contracts and are trying to be upwardly mobile. And if there is a way that they could do some business that allows them to keep hold of players like this, I'm sure they would love to. Their finances seem to be in a reasonable shape, so I don't think there's a panic there. I think it's more a question of Crystal Palace clearly, if the money is right for them, they don't stand in the way of letting players go on to different places in their careers, and maybe that's a pitch when they're trying to sign some of these players, and it's been a really good pathway so far. But I come back to the numbers need to be right, although it's a bit different with the clause. Remember when Arsenal tried to sign Wilfried Zaha and Crystal Palace had a really high valuation, it wasn't met, and they kept hold of him. So it's not a fait accompli, and there are other assets in the team who could attract some momentum. So a Mark Gehi, for example. There's no release clause on him, but there's a lot of admiration among multiple clubs. I think he's got a couple of years left on his contract, so it'd be interesting to see if Palace try and renew and extend him, whether he'd be interested in that, whether a move develops this summer, or whether he goes down to 12 months to go by staying an extra year. There's Joachim Andersen, another who, when I speak to Premier League clubs, they love his qualities and his character and personality too. He's had a really solid journey so far. Even players like Tyreek Mitchell, a left back, that's a position that many clubs are looking for. I'm not trying to generate interest in Palace players here. Doucouré was really highly thought of by Liverpool before his knee injury, for example. I'm sure other clubs looking at him as well, and is only a year into his Crystal Palace career. So, yeah, lots of that club to ponder. And what's fascinating is that they're already starting their inward recruitment, whether that's in preparation for departures or whether they're just trying to enhance their squad. So when you see the young centre back that I reported about, sort of coming in from a combination of Barcelona and Real Betis, where he was on loan last season, Morocco international, just 20 years old. You've got the Japanese central midfielder coming in from Lazio. It'd be a free transfer by the looks of it. They already did brilliant recruitment in January. With Munoz, Colombia international right back, who's hit the ground running. And I've just got to highlight Adam Wharton. Like everybody's raving about him, and rightly so. A bit of perspective's needed. It's early days, but from Blackburn Rovers for 20 odd million pounds, I presume his value has already tripled. Bayern Munich were interested in him in the previous window. They retain their admiration for him. I don't think Palace would have any interest in letting Adam Wharton go. He could go to the Euros. He did really well in the first England warm-up match last night. Let's see if he plays on Friday. And so you've got to tip your hat to like a Dougie Freedman as the sporting director who's in charge of the recruitment there, Steve Parish, who's the very active part of the ownership and chairman, and then supported by the American co-owners, David Blitzer, Josh Harris, John Textor, and really sort of inspiring the place since coming in is Oliver Glasner. So yeah, happy and very interesting days at Selhurst Park.
Yeah, and it will also be interesting in terms of Chelsea if they want to sell one of their homegrown players, the likes
Yep.
of Trevor Chalobah, Brozier as well. They've both been linked with moves away in previous windows, but it's obviously becoming apparent that those are the ones that, if they want to make maximum profit, that they could potentially see them depart. You mentioned obviously Tottenham in the context of Conor Gallagher. Interesting what's happening there at the club under Ange Postecoglou going into his second season. Sounds as if they are after a central midfielder, and obviously Conor Gallagher fits that bracket. Potentially a wide forward, a centre forward as well, someone to play across that attacking three, and also replacing anyone that potentially will depart. So in the fullback positions, or potentially, and this is an interesting one, I wanted to get your take on it, David. There has been some talk about Richarlison maybe wanting a move away. We know that he's been very open about his experiences in terms of mental health this season, and it may well be that a move post the Copa America potentially may come to fruition. Are you hearing anything in particular on that deal, or anything else in particular at Tottenham in terms of outgoings, which might push them into the market in a different position?
No, not much more than you, and I might throw it back to you because you've done a lot of work around Tottenham and specifically on Richarlison. He of course used to play for Watford, a club that you've covered so closely. But just specifically on him, there were some comments from him indicating that he would be quite keen to remain on these shores. And I don't know of any active movements towards a transfer right now. Clearly, this is just a general point across the market. If something develops with the Saudi Arabia or certain Premier League clubs who have got the sort of finances that would meet the expectation of a Tottenham Hotspur, then of course you'll listen to it. It hasn't been an amazing start to his Tottenham career, but at the same time, when he's been free of injuries, he has started to show signs of promise, and the sort of investment that Tottenham made to bring him in from Everton. It's not one you just turn your back on so quickly. And so, this is Brazil's number 9, you could say. He certainly has been in recent times. And so I think that would take a lot of thought. And I see the same reports and rumors as you, but I don't have anything concrete on him at this point. And yeah, you mentioned the midfielder, and they've done a lot of surgery last summer, especially on their defense, and that will continue. There's players like Ben Davies who constantly linked, although he always performs. Brennan Johnson was a big investment, and hasn't maybe quite worked as well as they would have liked so far, but that's not to say it won't. He's a very talented young player. You've got experiments like Manos Solomon. Injury affected him, but let's see if that's one they sort of review going forward. Timo Werner is going to be extended in terms, or has been in terms of a fresh loan deal from RB Leipzig. So there's a lot of, you sense a lot of moving parts. Pierre-Emile Højbjerg is constantly linked if the right opportunity arises and he wants to take it. Tottenham have been frustrated at players who haven't wanted to move, they have deemed surplus to requirements in the past. And, I'm not suggesting animosity, but just like the nature of the beast with the Hugo Lloris before he ended up leaving, and an Eric Dyer before he ended up leaving. And he's spoken publicly about maybe he should have gone that little bit earlier. And so that delays things at a club like Tottenham. But they have an opportunity now. I think when I speak to people around football about, the financial fair play situations, PSR, how almost every club is in really tight spots, you always get this impression that it's a bit better at Tottenham. It's a bit more comfortable on the financial side, and so they're not afflicted in the same way as some of the others. And that gives them a bit of breathing space and room to maneuver. Daniel Levy will be heavily involved with it, as always, and you've got Johan Lange there, who's the technical director. He brought with him Rob McKenzie from Aston Villa to help on the recruitment side. And this will be their first sort of full summer, if I think of it correctly.
Yeah.
They came before the January window on the eve of it, and so that was a baptism of fire, you could say, although they did some decent work. But they've now had 6 months to prepare properly, and what we saw of Langer at Aston Villa with some very good people there, like Mackenzie, is they tended to move quite early. You'll remember there was a number of deals at Aston Villa that got struck early in the window when nobody was really looking. Even the Timo Werner deal, that came a little bit out of the blue. Dragusin was a little bit more signposted. There was a lot of rumor and speculation on that, but and actually that hasn't so far worked out as well. And that's one, you need to watch and give some of these deals time. But look, if Tottenham want to make the step up, and they really do, then it's going to need to be another successful summer for them. And yeah, so don't know anything more specific. What about you? Because you're well connected around the club.
No, I think you've covered a lot there in terms of Tottenham, and it will be interesting to see how much of the relationship between Ange Postecoglou and the sporting directors team and recruitment team actually fuses this summer, because there was quite a lot of change last summer, as you mentioned, as they were sort of coming to the end of the Fabio Paratici era and changing into a sort of a new formation on and off the field. So it will be fascinating to see how it pans out, and also how Ange Postecoglou's mood improves or doesn't. We will see, because he was, I don't know, getting a little bit grumpy and a little bit, it seemed, disillusioned with how things were going at the end of last season. But I'm sure summer and a rest will help him. We shall see. It's interesting that we mentioned about Tottenham and potential change obviously being instigated by departures. Manchester United are another club that are in a similar boat. Obviously, you mentioned at the top of the show there about the future of Erik ten Hag, obviously having a huge impact on the club at the moment. Ineos and their changes, which they are bringing in, also having a big impact on how things are going to be run there. And Mark Critchley in the deal sheet does also report about the fact that there's only a handful of players that are actually off limits. And it's interesting, in the deal sheet, Mark Critchley reports that there's only a handful of players that are actually off limits this season. So it will be interesting to see how they react to offers and bids. One player in particular I wanted to ask you about, David, is Jadon Sancho, because it's a really interesting situation for him to have left because of a fallout with Erik ten Hag and have a good season with Borussia Dortmund towards the end of the campaign, obviously reaching the Champions League final. There have been reports out there that Borussia Dortmund may well not have enough money if they wanted to make that deal permanent.
Yep.
But then obviously if Erik ten Hag leaves, then he may well view Old Trafford once again as a big opportunity for him to go and showcase his talents. What's your sort of feeling on this?
There's no decision yet on Jadon Sancho's future. There'll be some talks, of course, between Manchester United and his representatives in the coming weeks. There will be some discussions, no doubt, between Manchester United and Borussia Dortmund and other clubs, by the way. Borussia Dortmund can't afford to buy him at the level that Manchester United would expect to receive for him. And probably emboldened by his excellent loan spell there, culminating in the Wembley appearance. But that's not to say that, if Jadon Sancho wanted and pushed for another loan deal at Borussia Dortmund, that it might be something that Manchester United would contemplate as they seek to continue to build his value up to maybe the levels that they were when he signed him, maybe even beyond if he really hits the ground running. But there's so much undecided here. Who's going to be the Manchester United manager? If it's Erik ten Hag, then it's not going to be an easy situation with Jadon Sancho. Ten Hag feels he never received the apology that he wanted, and I don't think there's a way back in that relationship. I suspect if Erik ten Hag remains in charge at Old Trafford, that Jadon Sancho will look to pursue his career elsewhere, either on a temporary basis again or permanently. If there's a change in the dugout, then depends who it is and whether that person would want Jadon Sancho and whether Jadon Sancho would want that person. But either way, whether it's being used at Manchester United or elsewhere, they will be looking to bring him back consistently to the level of form and finance that I think we all know he can be at. So yeah, that is one that is undecided, but at some point pretty soon there will need to be a direction of travel.
Now, David, one player that pops up a couple of times in this first deal sheet on The Athletic is the Slovenian forward Benjamin Šeško, who's at RB Leipzig, and he's liked by quite a few clubs, isn't he, at the moment?
Yeah, Benjamin Šeško is clearly marking himself out as one of the players that is going to be most talked about in this market. He has in previous markets, to be fair, because recruitment is so advanced these days and clubs are tracking every player and he fits the bill in terms of what he does in front of our eyes, but also the data and certain things we don't see. He's a high performer, and he was somebody that when he was it Salzburg to Leipzig, was attracting a lot of attention, and Leipzig won out on that occasion, helped by the relationship between the two clubs within the ownership group. And clubs like Arsenal were already onto him at that point. We come to the modern day, and yeah, I've talked for a long time about how highly Arsenal think about him. He's pretty much, top or very, very prominent on their list of candidates. But you're always conscious that these things can change in different directions. They might go for different positions. They might go for different people. The numbers might not work out. There are so many factors that means until we have concrete information, it doesn't really matter if somebody is top. It doesn't matter if somebody's leaning towards that club or this club, because it's what actually happens. And things aren't actually happening with him just yet. There's lots of conversations. His agent has been very prominent on social media. His tour of clubs, he's been posting photographs from Stamford Bridge. Chelsea are a club who like him. He's on their list. He's posted photographs from Arsenal. They're a club who like him. He's on their list. He's posted photographs from Manchester United. They like him. He's on their list. And there'll be more too on the continent. RB Leipzig would love to keep him, no doubt about that. There's been suggestions that they're trying to discuss a new contract for him to stay. And look, Manchester United is a bit more complicated there because of the managerial situation, the financial situation, the footballing situation. And so the feeling there is that a club like Arsenal, perhaps ahead of them at this moment in time, because they're very settled, they're very competitive. It's a good time to be involved at Arsenal. Maybe their finances are in slightly better shape. And then you have Chelsea, who are very ambitious, but, things are still a little bit not disjointed there, but they're still trying to bring it together. There's been huge spending. There's been a change of manager from Pochettino to Maresca, but you don't know with these things. It's also beyond what we just see on the outside world. Yeah, there's a release clause, but the reports in Germany suggest that the release clause has risen off the back of the season that RB Leipzig have had. And then what's the salary? What's the agent commission as well? That's always an important factor in these things too. So. I would say based on, everything we've seen and heard, there's a belief within the market and particularly in the Premier League that he will move this summer, and that's why they're vying for him. But this strength of determination at RB likes to keep him means you can't discount that. So yeah, another one that I'm not giving you a definitive answer on, but certainly it's one that we'll keep discussing.
Well, no, and also it's interesting because it leads us on to another big element of this transfer window, and it is that Šeško and many other players are going to be featuring at tournaments this summer. We have the Euros, which starts June the 14th, runs all the way until July the 14th. We have the Copa America, which starts June 20th, also finishes on July the 14th. And interestingly, at the moment, and I wanted to get your take on it, you've got a lot of players with expanded squads at the moment who don't necessarily know if they are going to be going to the tournament. So you've got roughly, 300 players at the moment in provisional squads with their international teams that don't necessarily know what they're going to be doing over the next month to 6 weeks. And that could also have an impact on the transfer window. So it'll be interesting once these squads are finalized and the tournaments get cracking, that might actually stimulate the early part of the market. And then you obviously have players that are going to tournaments with an opportunity to showcase their talents. And obviously the agents will be hoping to raise their values as well. What's your overall general view on how the Euros, the Copa, we've got the Olympics as well to run July 24th to August the 10th. It's such a busy time. How's it going to impact the transfer window for you, do you think?
Yeah, it's not ideal for the clubs at all because for multiple reasons, including major tournaments are not the best place to judge players. And so there's this age-old thing about not signing players off the back of a major tournament, and multiple case studies of times where that's happened and it's not worked out too well. Then there is the disruption it causes, multiple ways, difficulty doing medicals and holding negotiations, risk of injury, not having players for pre-season, and so on. And with 3 tournaments in and around the same time, it's really not ideal. And with all due respect to the Olympics, I think slightly less concerning because it's not a FIFA event, and therefore many clubs are putting a block on their players going. And especially those that will have competed in the Euros. So we'll see somebody like a William Saliba competing in the Euros for France, but I don't think he's going to the Olympics. Arsenal couldn't countenance that. He'd then be needed straight away for the Premier League season, and his body and that of many others just can't cope with that. What we'll normally see is a flurry of activity before the major tournament, especially when finances are good across the board. And some clubs have tried to get going. Chelsea lining up this deal for Tosin Adarabioyo, nipping in on hot on the heels of Newcastle, who were trying to wrap it up, and then Newcastle trying to do like a Lloyd Kelly, and you've got West Ham, the couple of Brazilians that they've been trying to bring in, although I think they've got some struggles there. So there are attempts to get this market moving, but this Euros and Copa, they are honing into sight quickly, and we're not really reporting on any significant deals taking place just yet, which is very telling. Maybe it's affected by the PSR situation, and clubs having a lot of financial.
Big, David, on June the 30th, we've almost got a secondary window, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, and that's being referred to in the industry as like this extra deadline day. So you've got the end of August, you've got the end of January, and now you've got June the 30th. And if clubs are in trouble, then a sale needs to take place before then. And just off the top of my head, a lot of people have mentioned Chelsea. By the way, I never fully answered your question on Chelsea and the need to sell. That the word coming out of Stamford Bridge is that they expect to be compliant
Yeah.
without player sales. Now, whether that be from work they've already done, whether it be permissible property
Yeah.
trading, I don't know, but that's the sort of vibe that they're giving off. But you see Aston Villa, they need to sell by the looks of it to fill a hole. We've documented that, Jacob Tanswell on The Athletic, of their financial fair play challenges, even with qualifying for the Champions League. And so does a homegrown player like a Jacob Ramsey, who we've reported on before, or one of the others. Have to make way, and a number of other clubs. It's not fair to just highlight them. Newcastle have had their challenges for sure, and now they're not in European competition next season, even more so. But just because there's a need to sell, it doesn't mean that the buyers are going to be there. And it's a buyer's market in terms of, you might look to be able to cut a deal, but then the selling club is more reluctant to sell for under the price that they think the player's worth, and then the days pass and drag on, and then players go away onto their international camps, and it becomes really complicated to get into those settings and try and speak to the players and try and potentially conduct medical tests. So again, not a clear answer, but I can only tell you now that it is generally very slow out there, and the tournaments are almost upon us. And so I think we're gonna have to face the prospect of deals happening beyond these tournaments in a greater way than they will before. There'll be the odd one during it. When I said about the risk of signing players off the back of a major tournament, the flip side is that players who shine and do well could maybe increase, as you said, their value. And we're not saying sign off the back of the tournament. We're saying maybe they'll go for a higher price. Maybe they'll be able to command a better contract because they've taken the opportunity in the shop window that is the Euros, the Copa, the Olympics to a lesser extent. And what I think this all sort of points towards is a really busy August, mid to late August, and towards the transfer deadline. I better sort of rest up now, you too, because I do think that it will be sort of backloaded with a lot of the business that needs to be done, and that could cause an absolutely chaotic sort of later end of the window right down until deadline day, which is also not good for the domestic seasons, because they'll already be up and running and suddenly squads will be changing. But it's the nature of the beast. And we can't do this opening podcast without touching upon Saudi Arabia, because this time last year, that was the story of the market. Quite incredible transformation of their ambitions and therefore their spending and recruitment. And it was jaw-dropping at times, the sort of deals that were going down as squads needed to be filled, and money was spent, and rosters were assembled. It'll be very different by the sounds of it this summer, because those squads are pretty much assembled. The slots have been filled. Okay, there will be a bit of movement and some availability. From what I hear, there'll be a sprinkling of top-level stars. So we, of course, should pay attention to it, and that's potentially something very newsworthy, but not in the same volume and quantity and bulk that we saw last time round. And then we may see some younger players, because there's this opening up of a couple more spaces for recruiting sort of 21 and under players, and that may be a slightly shifting dynamic. But this would then have a knock-on effect if it's not quite as busy as a year ago. And January certainly indicated that's the direction of travel, because barely anything happened with the Saudi Pro League. Then obviously clubs in the Premier League who saw Saudi Arabia as salvation, a cure to all ills of financial fair play, profitability and sustainability, allowing them to fill black holes and balance the books. It might not be the same case this time round. And that is a really interesting dynamic to the market. And right now I'm hearing that the Saudi Pro League, they're still trying to work out budgets and plans. Those are not in place. And until they are, a lot of these stories about your De Bruyne's and your Salah's are just rumors. And I don't know of sort of concrete developments on that front, and that definitely will have a ripple effect on the European market, and of course, high amongst that, the Premier League. On Salah specifically, you can check out the story that we did a while ago on The Athletic. The expectation at Liverpool is absolutely that he stays. And they are planning with him for next season as being a part of their squad, a key part of their squad. Yes, he is going into the last 12 months of his contract. We don't know of a contract renewal where talks are up to at this stage, and that will be a priority for the new sporting structure of Michael Edwards, CEO of football for Fenway Sports Group, and Richard Hughes, the new sporting director, high in their in tray, of course, alongside Virgil van Dijk and Trent Alexander-Arnold, who are in the same position. But all indications are that Salah wants to stay, and that even people I speak to around the Saudi Pro League suggest that they are of the impression that he wants to stay there and will be staying at Liverpool. Their interest has not gone away. It remains, but it was more urgent last summer when Al Ittihad tried to sign him because they wanted him as part of their squad for the Club World Cup. That's obviously passed now, and so it may be a case of, rather than trying to go through what they went through a year ago and making enormous offers to prize him away from Liverpool, where he's still deemed as a really important player, that if this situation remains the same in a year's time, he becomes a free agent summer of 2025, then they try and do it then. But Salah will also have a say in this, how he's looking physically, technically, in terms of his desires to compete for the biggest trophies, whether he wants to stay in Europe, or make that move. So that's one that, I'd refer people back to the article that we did a while ago. And as things stand, it's not one I expect to develop with the Saudi Pro League. But of course, they will be a subject of intense scrutiny, because even if it is a quieter summer for them, it will still be a lively one to an extent. And that brings intrigue in its own right.
So many subplots, so many deals to look forward to, so many calls to make, David. So we're going to leave it there. We've mentioned many of the things that are in the first deal sheet, and obviously beyond in the coverage on The Athletic. But there's also news in the first edition that's released every Tuesday on Liverpool. Mo Salah's talked about, Luis Diaz, Manchester City as well. Interesting news about the futures of Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne as well. Looking at Bruno Guimaraes of Newcastle. There's also talk of Alexander Isak and some of the clubs looking at him in the Premier League beyond Newcastle. Obviously, they don't want to lose him. There's more club-specific transfer news for you as well, with individual club deal sheets, which you can check out, which are available to read on The Athletic. Huge thanks to David. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching on YouTube. Don't forget to review the podcast, leave your comments below, and check out the deal sheet on The Athletic. That's available for you at the moment. Thanks very much for listening. And there'll be more episodes of The Radar, all part of our Athletic coverage this transfer window, coming up for you tomorrow.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.